My fair citizens of Sodium City, we finally have the Dungeons and Dragons Adventures of the Forgotten Realms set preview, except it's not a basic ass set preview. I'm not going to go through every single card and just say, oh, this is a 5 out of 5. Great for sealed, bad for construct. You know, I don't have the authority on that bullshit. So what we're going to do is we're going to go through the top 10 jank cards that I'm really excited to brew around. I'm going to reveal the cards that I'm going to be putting with it, go over some combos that I'm going to be messing around with, just to kind of give you a little bit of a vision of what you're going to be able to see in the next month or two, or however long it takes me to go through all of these various combos. If you are watching this video right when it comes out, I will either be live over at twitch.tv/StriderStone, or I will be right about to go live. So make sure to go ahead and check me out over there. I do have announcements whenever I go live in the community section here on YouTube or over at my Discord. Make sure to join over there. I always have contests and giveaways there as well. First up on the list, I'm going to put a card in here that everyone is going to be brewing around. It's not even necessarily brew at this point. It is going to be the Book of Exalted Deeds. Now, this is just a card that everyone has talked about and everyone thinks it's going to be a bit overpowered. I think it's probably going to be fine. I play a lot of land destruction, so I'm going to farm the fuck out of these decks. I have no problem with this card. I think it's going to be great. I love land destruction. I love it when good cards are this. So it is a 3 mana, it's triple white, legendary artifact. At the beginning of your end step, if you gain 3 life or more this turn, create a 3/3 white angel creature token with flying, which is very good. Then it has triple white, tap, exile the Book of Exalted Deeds, put enlightened counter on target angel. It gains you can't lose the game and your opponents can't win the game. Activate only as a sorcery. Now, of course, the reason I bring up land destruction is that everyone's going to pair this with Faceless Haven. Faceless Haven is a snow land that just taps for colorless but has 3 snow land. It becomes a 4/3 creature with vigilance and all creature types, which obviously is an angel. It is still a land, but it only happens till the end of turn, so it is still a land. But it becomes an angel for a little bit. You exile the Book of Exalted Deeds, and it still has the ability of you can't lose the game and your opponents can't win the game. So having a land with that ability on it is ridiculous. It's super, super powerful. However, again, I play land destructions. I don't really care. I think a lot of people are going to play this, and I'm going to have absolutely no problem. However, in standard, this may be an issue, but also standard. Standard's a joke, right? I'm gonna have a blast. I don't really have any big plans for this. Outside of that one combo, there's not really anything exciting and new that I can really think of for this. It is definitely something that we can put into a prison deck. It's a really easy way. So instead of having to run something that is way more expensive, being Platinum Angel, which is a 7 mana artifact angel that has the same text of you can't lose the game and your opponents can't win the game. Being able to run this instead of that, I think, is extremely powerful, and I really do like that particular capability. So I'll most likely be putting this in every single prison deck I run, whether it's Boros or just mono white. The other thing that I really want to do with this is throw in Chance for Glory to make it indestructible. Now, it's possible that you can run Maskwood Nexus in this particular deck as well. So Maskwood Nexus is a card to where all of your creatures are all creature types. So at that point, what you can do is you can play Cascading Cataracts, which is an indestructible land. The indestructible land, you can somehow turn that into a creature through various means, whether it's Nissa, whether it's, I mean, there's tons of ways to make it into a creature, right? So you make it into a creature and then you activate that ability on it and it's indestructible. So at that point, it's almost impossible to get rid of, because I don't even know if there's any ways to exile lands, if I'm not mistaken. trying to think. I don't think there's any ways to exile land. So unless you do it on the spot, I don't believe there's a way to get rid of that. So chance for glory on this particular instance and making it indestructible is going to be absolutely insane. I think it's going to be extremely difficult to deal with since it's only going to be a land from that point on. Chance for glory is just awesome as it is. It's 3 mana, take an extra turn after this one, all your creatures gain indestructible. And it's indestructible permanently. It's not just till end of turn, it's permanently. So it's amazing on a couple levels. Being able to take an extra turn for 3 mana is great. And of course, just getting everything indestructible, including the land that has the ability of you can't lose the game and your opponents can't win the game. I mean, it has capabilities of being extremely overpowered. It's just a matter of how well we abuse it. So we'll find out. Let's find out. Now, the second card on our list is going to be a 6 mana mythic, which of course I love my expensive mythics. It is a planeswalker called Mordenkainen. Maybe? Question mark? Maybe? I don't know. I can't read. Whatever. 6 mana. It is in blue. Comes in with 5 loyalty, but has a +2. So 6 mana, 7 loyalty essentially when it comes into the battlefield, which I do like. I like the bigger loyalty, expensive planeswalkers. The +2 is draw 2 cards, then put a card from your hand at the bottom of your library. That's really interesting. Especially for blue. I do find that really interesting. That almost seems more, I actually have no idea what that seems more of. But I do like that ability. I do like that ability. It seems really powerful just because it's any card from your hand. You're just throwing it at the bottom of your library. I think it's really powerful. But 6 mana is like expensive as fuck, right? Has a -2 of create a blue Doge illusion token, which is adorable. We love dogs. With this creature's power and toughness equal to twice the number of cards in your hand. So this can be really, really good depending on how many cards you're going to be drawing. There's I mean, it's blue, so that you could draw a bajillion cards, right? But the really, really cool thing about this planeswalker is the -10. The ultimate, which is exchange your hand and library, then shuffle. You get an emblem with you have no maximum hand size. This is ridiculous because if you have Omniscience out, you basically win the, I mean, most of the time if you get Omniscience out, you just kind of win the game. However, if you're exchanging your hand and your library, it can be ridiculous. One of the better things, or one of the meme things that you could do, if for some way you get out the Warlock Class, that adds double loyalty on all your planeswalkers, or adds double the counters on whatever you put onto the battlefield. You play this planeswalker, the Mordenkainen, you automatically ultimate right away if you have no other cards in your hand, and you already have a 4 mana Jace on the battlefield, for instance, that makes you win when you have no cards in your library. When you draw a card, you just win. Then you swap your hand with your library, target yourself, mill a few cards, draw a card, and just win the game that way. That would be really interesting. It seems intricate and almost not doable, but it really kind of depends. It could definitely be seen in a Sultai Ultimatum deck, which I'm kind of worried about. But I don't think it's powerful enough to do that. I believe cards like Professor Onyx would be more powerful as far as a planeswalker goes, especially in Historic. There's like tons of more powerful cards that I believe that you can choose to bring in this with Warlock Class than anything else. But regardless, I think that you could do potential memes with this. I just really like the fact that you can exchange your hand with your library. I find that really, really funny, and I want to do that as many times as possible. The other way to ultimate this pretty early on is going to be using Oath of Teferi. Now, Oath of Teferi, when it comes into the battlefield, this is a 5-mana enchantment, which is kind of expensive, but you get to blink a card, so exile it, and then at the beginning of your end step, it comes back into play, but you get to use your Planeswalker abilities twice per turn instead of just once. So obviously, having a +2 ability, being able to do that twice, means you get to ultimate the next turn. So if you already have an Oath of Teferi out on the battlefield, and then you play Mordenkainen, you're going to +2, and then you're going to +2 again, which gets his loyalty up to 9. And then your next turn, you're going to +2, making the loyalty 11, and then you get to ultimate at 10, which is really, really, really nice. Being able to ultimate on the next turn that you play him is just absolutely ridiculous. It prevents you from having to have the Phyrexian Facefucker 5000 or Vorinclex, whatever you want to call him, whatever his proper name is. It prevents you from having to do that because creature removal is very rampant in Historic, especially. Enchantment removal, not so much. And usually, if you have Planeswalkers and Oath of Teferi out, they will kill a Planeswalker over the Oath 9 times out of 10. So that is something that you will obviously want to look out for. Getting an extra turn with this particular Planeswalker can also be very important, but not amazing. Approach of the Second Sun is going to be one of those cards that I think could make this Planeswalker very, very good. So Approach of the Second Sun is a 7-mana spell to where whenever you cast it from your hand, if it was cast prior in this game, then you win the game. Otherwise, you gain 7 life and put it 7th from the top of your library. Now, if you put it 7th from the top of your library and you have Mordenkainen on the battlefield, you're +2ing him, draw 2 cards, put 1 card at the bottom of your library. If you have Oath of Teferi out, you do it again, put another 2 cards. That just means you went through 4 cards after casting Approach of the Second Sun, which, I mean, going through 4 cards immediately after doing that, I mean, you're threatening lethal that next turn. Maybe not lethal, you're threatening the game. You just win the game the next turn. So it could be really, really powerful. It just kind of depends on what the opponent lets you get away with or what kind of protection that you have. Now, the card that's going to take up number 8 on the list is going to be Ocarina of Jelly. I have no fucking idea how to even say that word. So it's an X green 0/0 with trample. When it enters the battlefield, it comes in with X +1/+1 counters, which is obviously great. But then it has split, which is whenever it dies, if it had 2 or more +1/+1 counters on it, create a token that's a copy of it. At the beginning of its next end step, the token enters the battlefield with half that many +1/+1 counters on it, rounded down. So this is just amazing because you're consistently adding counters to a creature. You're just making creatures coming in with +1/+1 counters. It's just +1/+1 counters. And then it splits, +1/+1 counters, splits, +1/+1 counters, splits, +1/+1 counters. So it's amazing. I really, really like it, mainly for the fact that we're able to always add 1/1 counters, and you're always going to do that. And very important, you're making 1/1 counters all of the time. Now, basically what we're going to use this for is Simic Ascendancy as the win condition. Of course, Simic Ascendancy is a card that I've always wanted to have a reliable win condition out of, but it's very, very difficult to do that. And again, Ozolith is also a card that really helps ramp up with Simic Ascendancy. So if we could just do turn 1 Ozolith, turn 2 Simic Ascendancy, and then start putting out creatures that just come in with +1/+1 counters, it'll just spiral out of control. Simic Ascendancy is just a 2-mana enchantment where you can pay 3 to put a +1/+1 counter on target creature you control, which is kind of whatever. It's a little expensive, but whenever 1 or more +1/+1 counters are put on a creature you control, put that many growth counters on Simic Ascendancy. At the beginning of your upkeep, if Simic Ascendancy has 20 or more growth counters on it, you win the game. So this is just amazing. I like alternate win conditions. They're always fun. They can be powerful. Most of the time they're pretty weak, but they can be powerful, and those are always the fun times when it happens. And of course, since the jelly is going to come in with +1/+1 counters, and then once it dies, it's going to split apart and make +1/+1 counters on the next creature, and then that dies, it's going to make +1/+1 counters on the next creature. You're just always putting +1/+1 counters on the creature, which just continuously feeds Simic Ascendancy. Now, the other thing that we're going to use is Ozolith. Ozolith is very important in this particular combo as well. Ozolith is a 1-mana artifact where whenever a creature you control leaves the battlefield, so it can be destroyed or exiled, if it has counters on it, put those counters on the Ozolith. At the beginning of combat on your turn, if the Ozolith has counters on it, you may remove all counters from the Ozolith, put them on target creature. Now, once again, with the jelly, it's coming back into play with half the +1/+1 counters, and when it leaves the battlefield, all of the +1/+1 counters are going on the Ozolith. Now, the copy of the jelly is coming into play with half the +1/+1 counters, and then the Ozolith is putting all of the +1/+1 counters on that copy of the jelly, which makes it bigger than what it was when it initially came into play. If that ends up dying, then all of the counters go back on the Ozolith, and then the jelly comes into play with half those counters, which is still more than what it is when it first was casted, and then the next turn all of those counters go back on the Ozolith. And once again, it's just a consistent, you cannot kill it unless you blow it up every single turn. It is a ridiculous combo. It's going to be extremely difficult to deal with once people figure it out. I would be very, very surprised if someone like Rumty doesn't use this. Maybe not. Maybe I wouldn't be surprised because Rumty likes good cards, but it's possible that I can convince him to play something like this. Possibly. We'll figure it out. There are many different cards that allow you to put additional +1/+1 counters on creatures whenever they come into the battlefield or whenever they get added onto it at all. So you have Winding Constrictor, Conclave Mentor, Branching Evolution, Hydra's Growth. There are just so many things that you can do to make this even more powerful. It just depends on how much you want to go into that particular way, or if you just want to go hard in on the jelly and then a ton of ramp. Now, I would really highly recommend running a card called New Horizons in this deck. New Horizons is a card that I would say almost nobody uses, even though it's been reprinted a billion times. I don't think anyone even knows what this card does. New Horizons is a 3-mana enchantment. You actually enchant a land to where when it enters the battlefield, you put a +1/+1 counter on target creature you control. This just kind of fits the theme of adding +1/+1 counters, but also you enchant a land, and that land has tap to add 2 mana of any one color to your mana pool. So this can help if you do end up going the Winding Constrictor route and you end up needing black, or if you end up going the Conclave Mentor route and you need to add white, or if you go both, you need to add either or. New Horizons, I think, is a really, really good add in this particular deck. It is a card that nobody uses, but again, it's been reprinted a million times, and I think it could be very valuable in this particular deck. Now, Inferno of the Star Mounts is a 6-mana 6/6 creature that can't be countered and has flying and haste. This is really, really cool. However, it has the ability of 1 red. It gets +1/+0 till end of turn. It's kind of whatever. But when its power becomes 20 this way, so it has to be that way, it deals 20 damage to any target. So that's really cool, right? You can do a lot of things with this. However, that is a massive mana dump, and it's going to cost a shit ton. It's going to be almost impossible to do unless you're comboing it properly. Now, of course, the obvious thing that you would be able to do is the Inferno plus Ironcrag Feet plus Ironcrag Feet. So Ironcrag Feet is 4 mana, adds 7 red sources to your mana pool. You just do that twice. That's 14 mana. And then obviously 6 plus 14 equals 20. But 6 mana, for the creature, 4 mana for Ironcrag Feet, and another 4 mana for Ironcrag Feet. That's 14 mana total, which is pretty heavy. And that's if you want to do it on the same exact turn that you cast the creature, of course. One of the other ways that you can make it a tiny bit cheaper is by using Unleash Fury, which is 2 mana, and then cast Ironcrag Feet, and then have 1 additional red source. So Unleash Fury is 2 mana to double the power, which makes it 12 instead of 6. 12, and then obviously Ironcrag Feet adds another 7 power to it, and then 1 more mountain makes it up to 20. So again, that is a total of 13 mana instead of 14, which doesn't really help all that much. Helps a little, but doesn't help a whole lot. Now, I believe the best way to do this, as far as what I can think of right now, unless you want to go into Mirari's Wake and go into green with a lot of ramp, things like that. If you want to go outside of mono red, I think the best way to do it is going to be using Immortal Sun, which is a 6 mana artifact that makes all of your spells 1 colorless cheaper, which is ridiculous. It also gives all of your creatures +1/+1, which is very relevant when it comes to this particular scenario. So at this point, the creature is 5 mana instead of 6. You're going to cast that, and it has 7 toughness instead of 6. Then you're just going to cast Unleash Fury, which is 1 mana instead of 2. And then it becomes 14 toughness, which is great. And then you can cast Ironcrag Feet, which is 3 mana instead of 4. And that obviously gets you 7 mana, creating a 21/7, I think is what it is. So that gets you to 20 toughness, kills the opponent, hopefully, with 9 mana value total. But of course, you have to have Immortal Sun onto the battlefield. Now, this way with Immortal Sun, I believe is the easiest, most reliable, or most consistent. I don't really know how. I think this is probably the best way to do it. I don't know. It's very possible that there's a better way to do it. Maybe let me know in the comment section below if there is a better way to do it. I'm not 100% sure. Maybe you all thought of something that's better. So please let me know in the comment section below if there is a better way, because I would like to know. But one of the best things about this deck is that you can actually run 4 Ironcrag Feats without feeling bad. So usually when you're running 4 Ironcrag Feats later on in the game, it's just sitting there doing nothing. A lot of times in red, you don't always have a mana sink to just dump everything into. So it kind of just feels bad unless you're discarding cards to draw other cards. It's just sitting there doing nothing. So this deck allows you to run 4 Ironcrag Feats, and it feels great, right? You never don't want an Ironcrag Feat. Number 6. This is kind of when it starts to get a little bit juicy. Number 6 is going to be Treasure Chest. And I think most people think this is the worst card on the top 10 list, and I might agree with you, except for the next one. But Treasure Chest has a lot of potential. And it is a 3 mana artifact, which makes it cheap. And then it has a 4 mana activation, so you can do it the next turn. It kind of reminds me of a cheaper Lithoform engine as far as how it works. It's kind of a 3 mana do nothing until the next turn. Now, the ability it has is a 4 colorless mana sacrifice Treasure Chest. That's the part that sucks. You have to sacrifice it. But you get to roll a d20, 20-sided die. And if you get a 1, you're trapped and you lose 3 life, which sucks. So this could kill you. It could be funny though. It's gonna be one of those things where it's gonna be really funny if it happens. It's also gonna suck a lot if it happens a lot. But knowing MTG Arena, it's going to be the Mirror March thing where it just always happens. If you get a 2 through 9, you're gonna create 5 treasure tokens, which is amazing, especially since we're talking about running some other treasure decks. This could be good in that if you really want it to be, or it can be very good ramp later on. Yeah, it is slower ramp, but at the same time, it could be absolutely ridiculous ramp. I haven't crunched the numbers on it quite yet. It does suck because you won't be able to do anything on turn 3. On turn 4, once again, you would have to hit 2 through 9, and then you would have 5 mana available instead of just 4. So it's one of the things that it just, I'm not sure if it's going to be good enough as far as ramp goes, but if you get a 10 through 19, you gain 3 life and draw 3 cards, which is amazing. That is actually very, very good, and you have a lot of chances to do it. It's not quite a 50% chance, but it's high up there, right? If you roll a 20, you get to search your library for a card. If it is an artifact card, you may put it onto the battlefield. Otherwise, put that card into your hand, then shuffle. Now, we can use any artifact for this. Anything that's big, whether it's a Great Henge, whether it's Wizard's Spellbook that we're going to talk about later on in this list. I mean, there's so many different artifacts that are in the game. This could be really, really interesting. But just being able to tutoring, I think, is going to be really bad. I'm pretty sure you literally have to put an artifact onto the battlefield. So you're going to have to find a really good artifact to put onto the battlefield. It just depends on what you want to do with it. Now, of course, I'm going to be running this with Lithoform Engine. There's just absolutely no question about that. Lithoform Engine 4-mana artifact has the ability of 2 tap, copy target activated or triggered ability you control. You may choose new targets for the copy. Now, since treasure chest cost 4, that means you're going to be paying 6 total, but you're going to be able to do the treasure chest ability 2 times. So unfortunately, it's possible that you could lose 6 life, which would suck. It would be funny. It would suck. But you could potentially draw 6 cards and gain 6 life, which would be ridiculous. You could create 10 treasure tokens, which would be insane. You could search your library for 2 artifacts and put them onto the battlefield, which would be pretty good. But I think for the most part, you may almost utilize this for the treasure tokens, and you could do multiple things with that. Now, another one of the best things that we can do, especially with the newer cards, is getting the bonus rolls from Barbarian Class and Pixie Guide. Now, Barbarian Class is really nice because it's cheap. It's a 1 red enchantment that allows you to get a bonus roll. If you were to roll a d20, roll it a second time and you ignore the lowest roll. So this almost guarantees the gain 3 life and draw 3 cards, which is, once again, ridiculous. If you're going to be paying a little bit of mana, especially later on in the game, even if you only want to run this as a tiny bit of card advantage, since it's colorless, you can run this in any deck. You can run it in a mono green, you can run it in a mono white. Maybe mono white finally has card draw, quote unquote. So it's possible that you can do that. Obviously, if you're running mono white, you can't run Barbarian Class, but if you're going to go into Boros or whatever it's called now, I can't remember off the top of my head. I'm sure it'll be posted here somewhere. But if you want to run that, I'm sure it'll work. And mono red should work fine. It'll be great in land destruction. I think this card is pretty underrated. I think most likely I'll be running this with land destruction, and I'll be getting out God Pharaoh statue as early as possible. And just being able to gain 3 life and draw 3 cards in a land destruction deck is absolutely obscene. It's going to be fantastic. I cannot wait to play this deck. And then, of course, Pixie Guide, 2-mana blue creature. It's a 1/3 with flying. It does the same thing Barbarian Class does. It allows you to roll the d20 a second time and ignore the lowest roll, and neither of these are legendary. So you can have 4 of each of these out, which means if you roll the d20 once, you're actually going to roll it 9 times and ignore the lowest roll. So it could be ridiculous. It's really, really funny, but it'll be really interesting how this actually plays. There's, of course, many ways to cheat this into play. You can do Triumphant Reckoning, which is a 9-mana sorcery. You can cheat that in using Mizzix's Mastery, but I really don't think you want to do that. The amount of supporting cards that you would need is just not good enough, so I would probably stay away from Triumphant Reckoning. Refurbish is a decent alternative. That's a 4-mana sorcery where you just get to return an artifact card from your graveyard to the battlefield. This is just really an enabler. It doesn't really cheat it into play because it's still more expensive than what it is to begin with, but it's once you sacrifice it, if you have refurbish, the next turn you could just bring it back. Ridiculous. Trash for treasure, 3 mana red source. If you sacrifice it and you make 5 treasure tokens, you can sacrifice 3 of those treasure tokens, leaving you with 2, to cast Trash for Treasure, sacrifice one of those treasure tokens, and bring that back into play. Now, that leaves you with 1 treasure token. You have 1 treasure token. You're netting 1 mana, which is not great. And you're also down like 2 cards, but it's a thing that you can do, right? If you're desperate, you can do it. If you have to do it the same turn, something you can do. Now, as for the 5th card I'm most excited about, it's going to be Xanathar Guild Kingpin. I have no idea if I'm going to be able to get this to work. This is either going to be the most exciting card to deal with or the most frustrating card to deal with. It is a black-blue card, so we're going to have to deal either with a lot of counters or a lot of discard. Either way, it'll be interesting, but this is a 6 mana 5/6. It's a legendary creature, but at the beginning of your upkeep, choose target opponent. Until end of turn, that player can't cast spells. You may look at the top card of their library at any time. You may play the top card of their library, and you may spend mana or mana of any color to cast this way. Now, this could be really funny in multiple different ways. First of all, this is fantastic because this means that the opponent cannot counter your spells. However, it's 6 fucking mana. So having a 6 mana creature just to make it so people can't counter your spells and it doesn't stay in effect immediately, it's only at the beginning of your upkeep that it actually takes effect. The opponent gets an entire turn whether they can blow it up or not. And since it costs 6 mana and then you have to protect it after that, you're effectively going to have like 9 or 10 mana for this to even really stick onto the battlefield and be effective. So I'm a little bit worried about that. So the biggest things that we could do is really just bring it back after it dies. We can reanimate it in multiple different ways. There's a ton of ways to reanimate a card. Keeping it alive with things like Teferi's Protection or just, again, counter spells. We can force them to discard all their cards so that they would be on top deck mode. But at that point in time, if they're on top deck mode, it's very rare that they're going to just be top decking a counter spell that is really going to end our career when we already have a 5/6 on the battlefield on top of that. So it's one of those things to where it could just be a win more and that's it. So it's something that we have to keep an eye out on. Overall, Xanathar is one of the creatures that I'm having the most problems actually coming up with ideas on how to build around it or how to work with it. So if you do have any ideas, please let me know in the comments section below. I'd be really interested to see what ideas that you have, if any. One of the biggest, most expensive cards that I'm really excited to play around is going to be Wizard's Spellbook. Now, most people are going to say that this card is completely unplayable, which is possibly true, but you never know until you try to meme hard with it. So this is a 7 mana artifact, not legendary, by the way, not legendary, okay? So it's a 7 mana artifact that has the ability of tap, exile target instant or sorcery, doesn't have to be your graveyard. Exile target instant or sorcery card from a graveyard, and then you get to roll a 20-sided dice, activate only as a sorcery. If you roll the numbers 1 through 9, you copy that card and you may cast that copy. Now, if you do that, you actually have to pay the full amount of the card, which does kind of suck. You want to try to avoid that as much as possible, and we do have ways to get around that, which we'll go over here in a second. But if you roll a 10 through 19, you get to copy that card, and you may cast the copy with paying 1 colorless rather than paying its mana cost, which is amazing. Now, as for the big mamma jamma, if you hit that 20, which obviously, since I am a streamer and YouTuber, I will always hit 20 because we have the privilege and the priority over everybody else. That's just how Wizards does it. We get to copy each card exiled with Wizard Spellbook, and we get to cast any number of the copies without paying its mana cost. So if I end up tapping it, exiling a card, and getting a 1 through 9 for somehow it messes up, right? Some weird glitch in the game. I can't cast it, so it stays exiled, right? Do it again, stays exiled. Do it again, stays exiled. Do it again, stays exiled. Whatever, we do this 10, 15 times, really sucks, right? But one of those times we rolled a 20, boom, we got the 20. What happens at that point is we can cast literally every single card that was exiled by it for freezies. And that's amazing. But obviously there has to be that many instants and sorceries in the graveyard, and they have to be good. So we can have a combination of milling the opponent, milling ourselves. There's a couple ways to do it, but we just have to mess around with it and tinker with it to find the optimal thing, really, is all it is. Now, since the tap ability is free, you don't have to pay any mana to tap it and use that ability. We really, really want to use the copy ability of Lithoform Engine. So Lithoform Engine is one of my favorite cards. I think it's extremely busted, and coupling it with a card like Wizard Spellbook is going to be insane. So Lithoform Engine 4-mana artifact has the ability of 2 colorless tap, copy target activated or triggered ability you control. You may choose new targets for the copy, which means I can tap Wizard Spellbook, pay 2 colorless, tap Lithoform Engine, exile 2 instants and sorceries. We also get to roll 2 d20s, 20-sided die. So this could be ridiculous, it could be hilarious, it could be horrible, it could be fun. I mean, there's so many different things that we can do. Either way, it's going to be great. The other thing that Lithoform allows us to do is that with Wizard Spellbook, if we get a 10 through 19, we're able to cast that card with paying 1 colorless. Now, Lithoform, and it's cast. You're casting a copy. Lithoform Engine has the ability of 3 colorless tap, copy target instant or sorcery spell you control. You may choose new targets for the copy, which means we could pay 4 mana total for colorless mana and copy whatever spell that we copied, which is also amazing. We can also just pay 4 mana tap to copy the permanent if we just hard cast that Wizard Spellbook. Not really going to happen, but I suppose it's possible if we absolutely want to. Now, the other thing that we can do to go super hard in a Wizard Spellbook is by getting bonus rolls through Barbarian Class or Pixie Guide, which are also new cards. Barbarian Class is a 1 red mana enchantment, which is just amazing. It's super good for this particular case. The fact that it's an enchantment and it's 1 mana feels really bad for the opponent to get rid of. But it's also really high priority in this particular shell that we would be using. So if you were to roll 1 or more dice, instead roll that many dice plus 1 and ignore the lowest roll. So this almost hopefully ensures that we get a 10 through 19, hopefully a 10 through 20. And I don't know, it's just absolutely ridiculous. I think it will be a blast. Hopefully it'll be a better Mirror March. I really wish Barbarian Class affected coin flips as well as D20s, but it does only affect dice, so that's sad. But it's really, really fun. I think that Barbarian Class is going to help this deck out even more than anything else. Now, Pixie Guide is another card that allows us to roll another D20 and ignore the lowest roll. This is a 2-mana creature, though. It's a 1/3, so it does have a little bit big of a butt. It does get out of the Bonecrusher Giant Stomp range, which is nice. It's also a 1/3 flyer, so it's a decent blocker as well. But if you were to roll 1 or more die, instead roll that many die plus 1 and ignore the lowest roll. So this is really cool. If you're going to have both of them out, you actually get to roll 3 die each time and ignore the lowest one. This is ridiculous. And again, none of these are legendary. So if you have all 4 barbarian classes out, you get to roll the die 5 total times and ignore the lowest one every single time you do it. This could potentially spiral out of control. I don't exactly know how yet, but it can. So I'm really excited to abuse this. Really, really excited to abuse it. I do think the Pixie Guide is going to be a lot less favored than Barbarian class, just because there's a lot more ways to cheat in an enchantment, especially because it's only 1 mana as well. However, Pixie Guide is blue, which shares the color of Wizard's Spellbook, so that is also going to help. It doesn't force us to go into red. It leaves up all the other colors, so it'll be interesting to see what we come up with. Now, we can cheat this into play by using cards like Triumphant Reckoning, Refurbish, or Trash for Treasure. Now, Triumphant Reckoning is a really cool and interesting spell to where you get to return all artifact, enchantment, planeswalker cards from your graveyard to the battlefield. So this obviously includes Wizard Spellbook and Barbarian class, which is the most important cards that we want. It can also include Lithoform Engine. However, this card costs 9 mana. So that's why we would also need this in the graveyard and then cast something like Mizzix's Mastery to get it out. This helps in many different ways because we're essentially able to cast multiple spells out of our graveyard at this point, so we can run a lot more draw discard spells or mill ourselves and things of that nature and get even more value out of our Wizard Spellbook and our Mizzix's Mastery than anything else. Now, Refurbish, however, is going to be a lot more reasonable. It's just a 4 mana sorcery. You can return target artifact card from your graveyard to the battlefield. Now, for this, you would also have to go into white, but it's a little bit less demanding since it's only 4 mana. You do still have to find a way to get Wizard Spellbook into the graveyard, so whether you have to do more draw discard or you have to specifically find a card that will search your library and put it into the graveyard, so you can run black for that. There's a couple ways to do it, but Refurbish is a decent option in order to do that. And of course, since most likely will already be in red, Trash for Treasure is an amazing card. It's just 3 mana sorcery. As an additional cost to cast this, sacrifice an artifact and return an artifact card from your graveyard to the battlefield. So this works really, really well with pretty much any artifact card that we don't care about, whether it's a treasure token from Seize the Spoils, which discards a card and allows us to draw 2 cards and then creates a treasure token. That's 3 mana, so if we end up drawing a Trash for Treasure, it's still, Trash for Treasure is still 3 mana. We already have 3 mana, and then we still have that treasure token. So we just sacrifice that treasure token, and then Trash for Treasure brings back the Wizard Spellbook or whatever we want from our graveyard to the battlefield. So there are a lot of possibilities for this to bring it back. It's just a matter of how can we abuse it and how many different ways we can abuse it. So I really like this set because it seems like it's almost more of a, not necessarily a jank enabler, but it's more of a jank glue or additional cards to go with existing jank, a jank supporter. It's like a jank supporter, I guess. And the last and final way that I think we can abuse this is by using Paradox Engine. So Paradox Engine, whenever you cast a spell, untap all non-land permanents you control. Now this is great because we can just run mana rocks, and since it costs 0 mana to activate Wizard Spellbook, we just get to tap it, exile whatever from any graveyard, and then we can cast it with whatever mana that we have open. And since you're casting it, you're untapping all your mana rocks as well as the Wizard Spellbook, and you can just do it over and over and over again. So then at that point, we have to find a card that is an artifact or anything that enables us to mill the opponent or mill ourselves so that we can continuously cast spells over and over and over again with Paradox Engine. So it would be interesting to be able to do that. I don't know how reasonable it is, but it would be funny or fun something. One of those F words. It'll be an F word for sure. Now the third card I'm actually really excited to brew around, which is very out of character, and it's a mill card, is Tasha's Hideous Laughter. Now, I know everyone hates mill, but this actually seems really, really funny. So this is a 3-mana sorcery. Each opponent exiles cards from their library until that player has exiled cards with a total mana value 20 or more. This could be either 2 cards, probably not 2 cards, but it could be like 2 cards, or it could be like 20 cards, depending on how big of a land pocket we get, or if we're going up against a mono red deck. If it's a colorless deck and they are running Ugins and Olamogs, it's not really going to hit too much, but it'll be a wild card and it should be really fun to mess around with. Now with this, we're going to have to use stupid cards like Collected Conjuring, I think, to really support how meme-tastic it is. So Collected Conjuring is a 4-mana sorcery. You exile the top 6 cards of your library. You may cast up to 2 sorcery cards with the converted mana cost 3 or less from among them without paying their mana cost. You put the exiled cards not cast this way at the bottom of your library in a random order. So this allows us to potentially cast 2 of the Hideous Laughters, and then obviously we're exiling things with a total cost of 40 instead of 20. This is just ridiculous. It can kind of spiral out of control. Well, hopefully it can spiral out of control, and we could just mill, or rather exile, because it's not even a mill technically, but we're exiling. It could be really, really funny. Now, of course, with this, the best things that we could do would be any type of copy spell. So whether it's double vision or, I mean, it could be 4-mana Ral, it could be repeated reverberation, anything that copies it, lithoform engine, literally anything. It would just increase the overall power with it and make it so much more fun to play around with. But anything is possible. Anything is possible with this card. Just making it as meme as possible, it's going to be fun regardless. One of the cards that we can really utilize as a win condition outside of milling is going to be Kaya, Orzhov Usurper. Now, this is a card that we've used as a win condition in the past, usually coupled with the 3-mana Ashiok, which is also easily used. But Kaya has the ultimate of it deals damage to target player equal to the number of cards that player owns in exile, and you gain that much life. So if we're able to copy the spell multiple times, the Hideous Laughter that is, exiling multiple cards, over 20 hopefully at that point, and then we're able to ultimate Kaya, we're just going to get a ridiculous amount of damage. Since Kaya is really cheap, it's 3 mana, comes in with 3 loyalties, so you can +1, it's already a 4 when it comes out, and then the next turn it's 5, and then the turn after that, boom, ultimate. Hopefully you're able to pull this combo off. I'm not exactly sure if we're able to or not, but it's definitely possible, especially if we're using a card like Ashiok as a supporting actor thing. Actor Nightmare, whatever you want to call it. So Ashiok is another amazing 3-mana planeswalker. Prevents them from searching their library, which can be amazing in many different scenarios, but has the -1 ability of target player mills the top 4 cards of their library, and then each opponent exiles all cards in their graveyard. So this just fuels the exile, which can deal more damage with Kaya. A lot of the times with Kaya, even with the Kaya Ashiok combo, we're just having problems getting that little bit of extra damage to hit them in the face for 20. So it's one of those things that we've always had a problem with, and once again with this set, just adding those 1 or 2 extra supporting cards with the meme combos may be enough to make it borderline unplayable to playable, possibly good. So again, it's another one of those combos that I'm really excited to play around with. Now, the number 2 spot is actually going to be 2 cards, kind of fitting for number 2, right? So it's going to be Xorn and Treasure Vault. Now, Xorn is a 3/2 elemental creature for 3 mana. And if you were to create 1 or more treasure tokens, instead create those tokens plus an additional token. Now, it doesn't necessarily double tokens. So if you're going to create 3 tokens, it's only going to create 4. It's not going to create 6 unless you're doing each one individually. So if you're using a card like Smothering Tithe and you draw 20 cards and opponent can't pay anything, it's going to do 20 individual checks on each individual treasure that you make. However, if you're doing something like treasure map and you flip treasure map to create 3 treasure tokens, it's only going to make 4 treasure tokens instead of 3, or instead of 6, as you may think it works. So that is one downside of Xorn. However, it is something that we got to think about. And the other card in this is going to be Treasure Vault. Now, Treasure Vault is really, really awesome because it is a land that is going to make treasures. And this is going to be tap out a colorless, but it also has XX tap, sacrifice the vault, and create X treasure tokens. And remember what we said about Xorn is that if you create 1 or more tokens, create that many plus 1. So you're only going to get the benefit of getting 1 additional treasure. However, it's just the amount of treasures that we're going to be able to generate just all at once. And that's kind of what's more important right now. Xorn is just an additional enabler, and Treasure Vault is also something that is a massive enabler for what else we're going to do with this. Now, you may be asking, okay, well, we have treasures. What are we going to do with it? Now, the default for this is going to be Revel in Riches. Since we've never really been able to have a reliable way to win with Revel in Riches, this may be the case that we're finally able to do so. Revel in Riches is a 5-mana enchantment to where whenever a creature an opponent controlled dies, has to die, can't be exiled, create a colorless treasure artifact token, which is, cool, it's whatever, but, obviously not every deck runs creatures, so for the most part that is irrelevant. It's just kind of a bonus. The part that matters is at the beginning of your upkeep, if you control 10 or more treasures, 10, you win the game. This is amazing. This is what we want to do. We need to finally get alternate win cons with Revel in Riches. We never really get to do it, but man, it should be hilarious and really, really fun. Now, Marionette Master is a 6-mana creature that has Fabricate 3, which we will essentially always give +3/+3. So Fabricate, if you're not familiar with the mechanic, you can either choose to make 3 1/1 artifacts, or you can give it 3 +1/+1 counters. So instead of it being a 1/3, it becomes a 4/6. But it also has the ability of whenever an artifact you control is put into the graveyard from the battlefield, target opponent loses life equal to Marionette Master's power. Now, treasure tokens are artifacts, and when you sacrifice them for mana, they do technically go to the graveyard. So every time you sacrifice a treasure for mana, or for nothing really, you get to have target opponent lose 4 life. Now, again, it's target opponent, so if they have the white ley line or hexproof or whatever, it isn't going to work, so you do have to keep that in mind. People don't really run the white ley line, but it is something to look out for. Regardless, with the amount of treasures that we're going to be able to make, Revel in Riches and Marionette Master are going to be amazing win conditions. Any other card that will bring a land back from your graveyard to the battlefield or to your hand is also going to be very useful for this, because we do want to make sure that our Treasure Vault does get repeated use, because there's no way we're really just going to have a ton of mana laying around. Because if we need to make 10 treasure tokens, we have to have 20 mana in order for Treasure Vault to really do anything for that. The chance of that, very, very low. So we can have a lot of supporting cards like Treasure Map and Smothering Tithe to help. But once again, Treasure Map isn't amazing with Xorn. It does help, but, of course, 3 treasures is nothing to scoff at. Smothering Tithe is probably the best alternative. If you're going to be using something like Smothering Tithe, you're also going to be wanting to use a card like Emergency Powers. So Smothering Tithe is a really fun enchantment. Whenever an opponent were to draw a card, they pay 2 colorless, or you create a treasure token. This is super funny, and of course, with the addition of Emergency Powers, which is basically everyone shuffles their hand and their graveyard into their library, and each person draws 7 cards, which is forcing them to draw 7 cards, which checks and makes sure that they draw 7 cards. They have to pay 14 mana with the Smothering Tithe, or you are making individual treasure tokens. And this is amazing with Xorn, because Xorn is specifically each individual treasure. If you make one, it makes an additional one. And the way that Smothering Tithe interacts with everything is that If they don't pay 2, you make 1 treasure token. And if you have Xorn out, you're going to make 2. Once again, once the second card is drawn, do you want to pay 2? No? All right, you're going to make 2 more. Want to pay 2? So off of 1 individual card being Smothering Tithe and then another one, Emergency Powers, if they're tapped out, you can make 14 treasure tokens and then you can say go. Pass the turn, or alternatively, you can take an extra turn, something like that, and then just kind of win the game from there from Revel in Riches. There's a couple things that you can do. I'm not exactly sure what the best thing to do is quite yet, but it should be really interesting as far as how we can abuse it. There's a lot of different ways. It essentially makes the win condition of Marionette Master and Revel in Riches more accessible. Giving more cards to those win conditions just makes those cards better. They were right on the brink of unplayable to playable, so it's possible that we're making them playable to good. Let's find out. And the card that I'm most excited to brew around, and most people aren't even going to expect this, except for maybe a couple, is going to be Warlock Class. Now, Warlock Class level 3, I don't really give a fuck about the rest of it, but level 3, at the beginning of your end step, each opponent loses life equal to the amount of life that they lost this turn. This is very, very important because we're going to couple it with some of my favorite cards of all time. The card that I'm most excited to put this with is going to be Revenge. Now, Revenge has been one of my favorite cards for a long time. So what you're going to do is you're going to target the opponent, which halves their life total, and then you're going to double your life total. But what this does with Warlock Class, obviously, is that you're halving their life total, and then at the end of your turn, you are going to do the other half of their life total. So it's really just a 1-turn kill. However, obviously it does require a lot of mana investment. So that's where we're going to try to have to find some type of way around that, whether it's through Cabal Stronghold, the land, and go way more into the mono black realm of things. Or if we do need to squeeze in Abzan, so go into the green, add some ramp with like Cultivate or Into the North, something that will give us that level of mana, because Warlock Class, I believe, is 7 mana to get to level 3, and then Revenge, of course, is 6 mana. So it's very difficult to get these to where they need to be. However, it is definitely possible, and it's something that I'm really excited to do. Now, if you're not familiar with Cabal Stronghold, if you're going to play Mono Black and Historic, it is essentially a necessary card. It's just a colorless land, but you can pay a 3 colorless tap to add 1 black source for each basic swamp you control. And it's very important that you notice that it's basic swamps. So you can't use dual lands and things like that because they're just not basic swamps. So you will need to make sure that you have a lot of basic swamps in this, and you need to make sure that you can find your Cabal Stronghold. So whether you're using Golos or something like that, you just need to be able to find a way to get that out on the battlefield so that it acts as legitimate ramp instead of just something that is in the deck somewhere, you know? Now, once you have 5 swamps out, you're actually going to be netting mana, which is really, really good because you can get out 5 swamps and a Cabal Stronghold somewhat earlier on in the game, especially because Mono Black, you just have a ridiculous amount of control with hand hate, removal, whatever you need to do in order to make it to the late game. It's super easy to do. So just get out to at least 5 swamps and a Cabal Stronghold, and then once you have those 6 lands, you're going to start tapping for 7 black sources. And again, once you get up to a 6 swamp, you're going to be getting up to like 8, I think, and then it just starts spiraling out of control. And if you get another Cabal Stronghold, you're just multiplying, and it can go fucking crazy. Now, if we decide to end up going mono black instead of throwing in white and green for Revenge and some additional ramp, we can just use Torgar, which is a 7/6, 8 mana avatar, very, very expensive. I wouldn't necessarily want to do this, but again, if we need to go mono black to use Cabal Stronghold for the ridiculous amount of ramp, it's definitely something that we can do. However, when it enters the battlefield, up to 1 target player's life total becomes half of their starting life total rounded down. So even if you're going up against something like an Angels deck where they have 50 to 75 life, something like that, you throw down Torgar and all of a sudden their life total becomes 10, right? This is actually ridiculous. Just in and of itself, that's hilarious. But their life total goes from like 70 to 10. 70 to 10. That's just ridiculous. Then, of course, with Warlock Class, it's going to do 70 more damage, and they're just obviously dead. It can do really, really funny stuff. It's just a matter of getting it done. That's going to wrap it up for the top 10 list of the cards that I am most excited about for this new set. And there's just going to be so much jank that is going to happen in the next couple months. So if you're watching this video right when it goes live, I'm probably also live over at twitch.tv/StriderStone. So make sure to go ahead and visit me over there, say hello. But most importantly, make sure to stay salty and subscribe to the channel for sure. And as for yesterday's comment question of the day, I asked you, what card are you most excited about for the new set? Obviously, if you're watching this video, you know exactly what I'm most excited about. Here are your answers. And if you want your comment featured in these videos, make sure that you answer the comment question of the day every single day, 7 days a week in the comment section below. Thank you all so much for watching. If you made it to this point, it means you either really enjoyed the video or you fell asleep and I'm waking you up now. Either way, thank you for all the support. I really do appreciate it. If you want to see more videos like this, hit that subscribe button, hit the bell notification, come out with videos 7 days a week.